History isn't just about dusty dates and old documents. It's a wild, messy story of big ideas, bold moves, and the occasional colossal mistake. Today, we're unpacking 101 moments that didn't just shape America, but redefined what this nation could be. From game-changing revolutions to eyebrow-raising decisions, these events prove one thing: history is anything but boring. Ready to dive in? Let's go! 1. In 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first person to step onto the moon during the Apollo 11 mission. His famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," became a symbol of human progress. Interestingly, the lunar landing was nearly compromised by a computer overload. Only NASA's quick thinking saved the moment. 2. In 1773, the Boston Tea Party became a pivotal moment in American history. American colonists, protesting against the British-imposed Tea Act, dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. This bold act of defiance helped spark the American Revolution, as it marked the beginning of widespread resistance to British rule. 3. In 1903, the Wright brothers made the first powered flight, lasting only 12 seconds. Though their aircraft barely lifted off, it marked the dawn of aviation. They chose Kitty Hawk, North Carolina for testing, as its soft sand provided an ideal environment for their fragile craft. 4. The Prohibition era from 1920 to 1933 had unexpected consequences. Rather than reducing alcohol consumption, it led to the rise of illegal bars and organized crime. Infamous gangster Al Capone became a symbol of this time, and bootlegging became a dangerous underground industry. 5. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, was a tragedy that claimed over 2,400 lives. This surprise attack thrust the U.S. into World War II. For many Americans, that day remains a symbol of loss and heroism. 6. The 1929 stock market crash marked the beginning of the Great Depression, one of the most devastating economic downturns in U.S. history. Unemployment skyrocketed, and many Americans faced severe hardship. It led to sweeping changes in federal economic policies, including the New Deal under President Franklin D. Roosevelt. 7. The Louisiana Purchase. In 1803 was one of the largest land deals in history, with the U.S. acquiring over 828,000 square miles from France for $15 million. It doubled the size of the country, paved the way for westward expansion, and led to conflicts with Native American tribes as settlers moved west. 8. In 1917, the U.S. entry into World War I changed the course of the conflict. American forces helped secure victory for the Allies, marking the beginning of America's influence on global politics. 9. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a pivotal victory in the fight for equality. It ended racial segregation in public places and prohibited discrimination. This law came after decades of protests and the relentless push for justice. 10. In 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Plessy v. Ferguson that separate but equal was constitutional. This decision legalized racial segregation, but it wasn't until the 1954 Brown v. Board of Education case that this ruling was overturned, leading to desegregation in schools. 11. The sinking of the Lusitania. In 1915 by a German U-boat was one of the key events that led the United States into World War I. The attack, which killed 1,198 passengers, including 128 Americans, fueled anti-German sentiment and played a role in President Woodrow Wilson's decision to declare war on Germany. 12. The California Gold Rush of 1849 brought hundreds of thousands of prospectors to the West. While only a few struck it rich, the event accelerated California's development and the expansion of the U.S. 13. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. In just 13 tense days, a diplomatic solution was reached, but it remains one of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War. 14. The creation of the U.S. Constitution in 1787 was a turning point in American history, establishing the framework of the federal government. The Constitution, with its checks and balances, still serves as the foundation of U.S. law, and its principles of liberty and justice continue to influence the nation today. 15. The Manhattan Project during World War II led to the creation of the first nuclear weapon. This groundbreaking scientific achievement ended the war, but its implications continue to shape global geopolitics today. 16. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed, marking the birth of the United States. It wasn't just a list of grievances against the British Crown. This document laid the foundation for the country's core values of liberty and self-governance. It's hard to overstate its historical significance. 17. The establishment of Yellowstone National Park in 1872 marked the first time a country created a national park to preserve its natural beauty for public use. This pioneering initiative in conservation helped pave the way for the creation of national parks across the globe, including in the U.S. 18. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963 shocked the nation and the world. He was a young, charismatic leader who symbolized hope, and his tragic death marked a turning point in American history. The event sparked numerous conspiracy theories, some of which persist to this day. 19. The construction of the Panama Canal, completed in 1914, revolutionized global trade by connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It was an incredible engineering feat, but its completion came at a steep price. Thousands of workers died during its construction due to harsh conditions and diseases. 20. The D-Day invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, was a turning point in World War II. The Allied forces landed on the beaches of France, launching a brutal assault that ultimately helped defeat Nazi Germany. It's remembered as one of the most critical military events in U.S. history. 21. The Battle of Gettysburg, fought in 1863, was a pivotal moment in the Civil War. It was the largest battle ever fought on American soil, and its outcome shifted the tide in favor of the Union. Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, delivered afterward, became a powerful symbol of the country's ideals. 22. In 1969, Woodstock, a music festival held in New York, became a cultural phenomenon. The event, attended by over 400,000 people, celebrated music, peace, and love, but also highlighted the era's social upheaval. It marked the height of the counterculture movement. 23. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act was signed into law, prohibiting racial discrimination in voting. This was a monumental step forward in the civil rights movement, as it aimed to eliminate barriers that kept African Americans from voting, particularly in the South. 24. In 1804, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark set out on their historic expedition to map the newly acquired Louisiana Territory. Their journey, which lasted over 2 years, provided invaluable information about the American West and opened the door to further exploration and expansion. 25. The invention of the telephone by Alexander Graham Bell in 1876 forever changed communication. While others were working on similar technologies, it was Bell's breakthrough that became the standard for modern telecommunication. His invention opened the door for innovations we now take for granted, like smartphones. 26. The U.S. fought its only major war with itself, the Civil War, between 1861 and 1865. It was a brutal conflict over slavery and states' rights, and its effects are still felt in the country today. Over 600,000 lives were lost, making it the deadliest war in U.S. history. 27. In 1945, the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This controversial decision brought World War II to a swift conclusion, but it also raised ethical questions that continue to be debated. The bombs not only shaped the war's outcome, but also launched the world into the atomic age. 28. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech during the March on Washington. His message of equality, justice, and nonviolence struck a chord with millions and became one of the most enduring symbols of the civil rights movement. 29. The rise of Silicon Valley in the 1970s and 80s turned California into the global hub for technology and innovation. Companies like Apple, Microsoft, and Intel revolutionized the way we live, work, and communicate. Today, Silicon Valley is synonymous with cutting-edge technology and entrepreneurship. 30. The 1999 impeachment of President Bill Clinton, following the Monica Lewinsky scandal, was a defining moment in American politics. While he was acquitted, the event highlighted the power and limitations of presidential authority and raised questions about morality and leadership in public office. 31. In 1812, the United States fought a war with Britain, known as the War of 1812. Despite a shaky start, the U.S. emerged with a sense of national pride and unity. The war ended with the Treaty of Ghent, but it also inspired the writing of The Star-Spangled Banner, which became the U.S. national anthem. 32. The Battle of Saratoga in 1777 was a crucial turning point in the American Revolution. After the Continental Army defeated British forces, it convinced France to enter the war on the side of the Americans. This foreign support ultimately helped secure independence from Britain. 33. The invention of the steam engine in the late 18th century played a pivotal role in the Industrial Revolution. James Watt's improvements to the engine revolutionized transportation and manufacturing, setting the stage for modern industry and economic growth across the world. 34. The signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783 ended the American Revolutionary War, recognizing the United States as an independent nation. The treaty also established the boundaries of the new country, paving the way for its growth and expansion across the North American continent. 35. The 1918 influenza pandemic, also known as the Spanish flu, was one of the deadliest pandemics in history. It infected a third of the world's population and killed an estimated 50 million people globally, with hundreds of thousands of those deaths occurring in the United States alone. 36. The American system of internal improvements, championed by Henry Clay in the early 19th century, sought to expand infrastructure across the country. It included roads, canals, and a national bank, all aimed at strengthening the economy and uniting the nation. It was a bold vision for a growing country. 37. The Pentagon Papers, published in 1971 by the New York Times, revealed the U.S. government's secret involvement in Vietnam and the misleading information it had provided to the public. The leak of classified documents led to a nationwide scandal, questioning the ethics of U.S. foreign policy and the trust between the government and its citizens. 38. The Federalists and Anti-Federalists debated the ratification of the U.S. Constitution in the late 18th century. While the Federalists supported a strong central government, the Anti-Federalists feared too much power in the hands of the federal government. These debates led to the inclusion of the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, ensuring protections for individual freedoms. 39. The 1960s marked the height of the Vietnam War, a conflict that divided the nation. The war sparked widespread protests and became a flashpoint for debates on U.S. foreign policy, civil rights, and the nature of American power. 40. The Battle of Lexington and Concord. In 1775 was the first military engagement of the American Revolutionary War. The "shot heard around the world" symbolized the start of the colonists' fight for independence, setting in motion events that would change the course of history. 41. The assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968 shook the nation to its core. He was a symbol of the civil rights movement, and his death marked a pivotal moment in the fight for racial justice. His legacy continues to inspire movements for equality today. 42. The Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921 was one of the worst incidents of racial violence in U.S. history. A white mob destroyed the prosperous black neighborhood of Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, killing dozens of black residents and leaving thousands homeless. For decades, the event was kept out of public memory but has since gained more attention as part of the reckoning over racial injustice. 43. In 1830, the Indian Removal Act was signed into law, leading to the forced relocation of Native American tribes from their ancestral lands. The result was the tragic Trail of Tears, where thousands of Native Americans died from disease, exposure, and starvation. 44. The creation of the United Nations in 1945 marked a new era of international cooperation. The U.S. played a key role in the formation of this global institution, which aimed to prevent future conflicts and promote peace worldwide. 45. The rise of McCarthyism in the early 1950s, led by Senator Joseph McCarthy, was a period of intense anti-communist suspicion in the U.S. McCarthy's claims of widespread communist infiltration in the government led to a series of hearings that ruined many careers and lives, despite little evidence to support his accusations. 46. The Bay of Pigs. Invasion in 1961 was a failed attempt by U.S.-backed Cuban exiles to overthrow Fidel Castro's communist government. The botched operation embarrassed the Kennedy administration and further strained U.S.-Cuban relations. 47. In 1857, the Dred Scott decision by the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that African Americans, whether free or enslaved, could not be considered U.S. citizens. This controversial ruling fueled tensions leading to the Civil War and was overturned by the 13th and 14th Amendments. 48. The U.S. purchased Alaska from Russia in 1867 for $7.2 million, an acquisition often mocked as Seward's folly. At the time, many questioned the wisdom of the purchase, but Alaska would later prove invaluable, with its natural resources becoming vital to the U.S. economy. 49. In 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act granted U.S. citizenship to Native Americans born in the United States. Prior to this, Native Americans were not considered citizens, despite living in the U.S. for centuries. The act was a long overdue recognition of their rights. 50. The New Deal, introduced by President Franklin D. Roosevelt during the Great Depression, transformed the role of the federal government. It created social safety nets, provided jobs, and reshaped the American economy. The New Deal changed the relationship between citizens and their government forever. 51. The battle for the American presidency has been heated from the start, but none more so than the election of 1800. It resulted in the first peaceful transfer of power between political parties in the U.S. when Thomas Jefferson defeated John Adams. It marked a turning point, proving that a democratic republic could thrive without bloodshed. 52. In 1890, the U.S. government passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, aimed at curbing monopolies and restoring competition. It was a major step in regulating big businesses that had too much control over the economy, setting a precedent for future corporate regulation. 53. The Gold Standard Act of 1900 officially placed the U.S. on the gold standard, linking the value of the U.S. dollar to a specific amount of gold. The move helped stabilize the currency, but would eventually be abandoned during the Great Depression, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt took the U.S. off the gold standard to combat economic collapse. 54. The Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s was a cultural movement that celebrated African American culture through literature, music, and art. Figures like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Duke Ellington helped redefine American culture and gave rise to a new sense of pride and identity for African Americans. 55. The Emancipation Proclamation, signed by Abraham Lincoln in 1863, declared that all slaves in the Confederacy were to be set free. While it didn't immediately free all enslaved people, it was a turning point in the Civil War and a monumental step toward ending slavery in the United States. 56. The construction of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 linked the east and west coasts of the United States for the first time, revolutionizing the country's transportation system. The project was a feat of engineering, but it also had devastating effects on Native American populations. 57. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh made the first solo non-stop flight across the Atlantic Ocean, from New York to Paris. This achievement helped spark a new era of aviation and established Lindbergh as one of the most famous figures in American history. 58. The Watergate scandal in the 1970s led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon, making him the first president in U.S. history to step down from office. The scandal revealed deep corruption within the government and reshaped the political landscape for decades to come. 59. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 destroyed much of the city, leaving more than 100,000 people homeless and causing millions of dollars in damage. However, it also led to sweeping reforms in building codes and urban planning, making Chicago a safer and more resilient city in the long run. 60. The abolition of slavery was achieved with the 13th Amendment in 1865, just after the end of the Civil War. This historic amendment legally ended the practice of slavery throughout the United States, yet the struggle for civil rights and equality would continue for many decades. 61. The creation of Social Security in 1935 during the Great Depression was one of the most significant reforms of the New Deal. It provided financial assistance to the elderly, unemployed, and disadvantaged, laying the foundation for the modern welfare state. 62. In 1973, the Supreme Court ruled in Roe v. Wade that women had the constitutional right to choose an abortion. The decision was a landmark moment in the fight for women's rights and sparked an ongoing debate that continues to divide the country. 63. The introduction of the interstate highway system in 1956 changed the way Americans traveled, worked, and lived. Stretching over 46,000 miles, this massive infrastructure project not only connected cities and towns but also contributed to the rise of suburban living and transformed the American economy. 64. The publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe in 1852 played a significant role in shaping public opinion about slavery. The novel's vivid portrayal of the brutality of slavery galvanized abolitionist sentiment in the North, making it one of the most influential books in American history. 65. In 1947, the United States launched the Marshall Plan, providing economic aid to help rebuild Western Europe after World War II. This ambitious initiative not only helped Europe recover, but also solidified the USSR's position as a global leader in the post-war world. 66. In 1963, President John F. Kennedy delivered his famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech in West Berlin, expressing solidarity with the people of Berlin during the Cold War. This powerful message came just months after the construction of the Berlin Wall, symbolizing the struggle between democracy and communism. 67. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president, prompting Southern states to secede from the Union. His election was the catalyst for the Civil War, and his leadership would ultimately bring an end to slavery and preserve the Union. 68. The founding of the United States Air Force in 1947 was a significant moment in military history. As a separate branch of the U.S. military, the Air Force rapidly grew in strength and importance during the Cold War, playing a critical role in the arms race and the defense of the nation against the Soviet Union. 69. The rise of the automobile industry in the early 20th century transformed the American landscape. Henry Ford's assembly line made cars affordable for the average person, and the growth of automobile culture reshaped cities, highways, and even American lifestyles. 70. In 1971, the U.S. introduced the first-ever military draft lottery since the Civil War. The draft was a response to the growing U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, and the controversial lottery system marked a new chapter in how the country would handle military service. 71. The 19th Amendment, ratified in 1920, granted women the right to vote. It was a victory for the suffrage movement, marking a huge step forward in the fight for gender equality in America. Despite decades of hard-fought battles, the struggle for full equality continued well into the 20th century. 72. The establishment of the Federal Reserve in 1913 aimed to create a more stable and secure banking system in the U.S. Designed to prevent financial panics, the Federal Reserve has played a crucial role in shaping U.S. monetary policy and responding to economic crises. 73. The founding of Jamestown, Virginia, in 1607 marked the first permanent English settlement in the Americas. The settlement faced immense struggles with disease, food shortages, and hostile relations with Native Americans, but it eventually laid the groundwork for the expansion of the English colonies. 74. In 1848, the Seneca Falls Convention in New York became the first women's rights convention in U.S. history. Organized by activists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, the event launched the women's suffrage movement, which eventually led to the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, granting women the right to vote. 75. The first successful atomic bomb test, known as the Trinity test, occurred in July 1945 in New Mexico. This marked the beginning of the nuclear age, and within weeks, the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ultimately leading to Japan's surrender in World War II. 76. In 1929, the first Academy Awards ceremony took place in Hollywood, honoring the best films of 1927 and 1928. It was the beginning of a tradition that would go on to become one of the most watched events in entertainment history, with the Oscars becoming a global symbol of cinematic excellence. 77. The assassination of President William McKinley in 1901 was a pivotal moment in American history. McKinley was shot by anarchist Leon Czolgosz, which led to Theodore Roosevelt becoming the youngest president in U.S. history at the age of 42. Roosevelt's presidency marked a new era of progressive reforms and global diplomacy. 78. In 1991, the Cold War officially came to an end when the Soviet Union dissolved. The U.S. emerged as the world's sole superpower, and the global political landscape shifted dramatically. The end of the Cold War signaled a new era in international relations and the redefined role of the United States on the world stage. 79. The Gadsden Purchase of 1854 was a treaty between the United States and Mexico, acquiring land that would later become part of southern Arizona and New Mexico. The purchase was meant to facilitate the construction of a southern transcontinental railroad, though its legacy remains tied to debates over territorial expansion. 80. The first televised presidential debate in 1960 between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon changed the way American elections were fought. The debate was broadcasted live and gave Kennedy a major boost in the polls, showing just how much television could influence political campaigns in the modern era. 81. The end of World War I in 1918 brought a sense of hope for peace, but it also set the stage for future conflict. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended the war, imposed harsh terms on Germany, sowing the seeds of World War II. The U.S. played a key role in the creation of the League of Nations, though it chose not to join. 82. The construction of the Pentagon in 1941, shortly before the U.S. entered World War II, symbolized the growing importance of defense and military power. The Pentagon has since become the epicenter of the U.S. Department of Defense and a symbol of the nation's commitment to national security. 83. The Great Migration, which took place between 1916 and 1970, saw over 6 million African Americans move from the rural South to urban areas in the North and West. This movement reshaped American cities and had a profound impact on culture, politics, and social change in the U.S. 84. The development of the polio vaccine by Jonas Salk in the 1950s was a monumental achievement in public health. The vaccine's success not only eradicated polio in most of the world, but also inspired further advances in medical research and vaccine development. 85. The creation of the Department of Homeland Security in 2002 was a direct response to the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. The department's goal is to safeguard the country against terrorism, manage emergencies, and strengthen national security measures in the post-9/11 world. 86. The 2008 financial crisis, triggered by the collapse of the housing market, led to a severe recession. The crisis resulted in widespread job losses, foreclosures, and economic hardship, but it also spurred significant reforms in the financial system to prevent future economic disasters. 87. The impeachment of President Andrew Johnson in 1868 was the first time a U.S. president was impeached. Johnson's clashes with Congress over Reconstruction and his lenient policies toward the South after the Civil War led to his impeachment, though he narrowly avoided removal from office by a single vote in the Senate. 88. The space race between the U.S. and the Soviet Union during the Cold War led to several important milestones, but one of the most memorable was the launch of Sputnik 1 by the USSR in 1957. It marked the beginning of the space age and set off a technological arms race that would eventually lead to the U.S. landing, a man on the moon. 89. The rise of the internet in the 1990s radically transformed American society. From the explosion of personal computers to the proliferation of the World Wide Web, the internet reshaped how people communicate, work, and access information, giving rise to a new era of digital innovation. 90. In 1865, the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln shocked the nation and led to widespread grief. Lincoln had been instrumental in preserving the Union during the Civil War. and his death marked the end of an era of leadership in the fight against slavery. 91. The introduction of the assembly line by Henry Ford in 1913 revolutionized manufacturing. Ford's innovation dramatically reduced the cost of production, made automobiles more affordable, and changed the American economy, sparking a new era of mass production and consumerism. 92. The invention of the cotton gin in 1793 by Eli Whitney revolutionized the American economy. While it significantly boosted cotton production, it also expanded the demand for slave labor, inadvertently cementing the institution of slavery in the South and escalating tensions that would lead to the Civil War. 93. The 1919 race riots in Chicago, sparked by racial tensions and competition for jobs after World War I, were a stark reminder of the struggles African Americans faced during the Great Migration. The violence underscored the systemic racism that would continue to plague the U.S. for decades. 94. The attack on the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in 1979 marked a turning point in U.S.-Iran relations. The 444-day hostage crisis that followed left 52 American diplomats and citizens held hostage, significantly straining the relationship between the two nations and shaping future policy decisions. 95. The passing of the Homestead Act in 1862 provided free land to settlers willing to farm the Great Plains, leading to the expansion of the American frontier. While it helped build the country, it also displaced many Native American tribes and contributed to environmental degradation in some areas. 96. The Stonewall riots of 1969 were a turning point for the LGBTQ+ rights movement. When police raided the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar in New York City, the community fought back, sparking a wave of activism that led to the formation of pride marches and greater recognition of LGBTQ+ rights. 97. The Whiskey Rebellion of 1794 was one of the first major tests of the new U.S. government's authority. Farmers in Pennsylvania protested attacks on whiskey, and President George Washington responded by sending in troops to quell the rebellion. This set an important precedent for federal power and the enforcement of federal laws. 98. The U.S. involvement in the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, was a significant chapter in the Cold War. While the conflict ended in a stalemate with no official peace treaty, it set the stage for America's ongoing military presence in South Korea and the rise of tensions between North and South Korea that continue today. 99. The 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act eliminated racial quotas in U.S. immigration policy, marking a major shift toward a more diverse and inclusive America. The act allowed for increased immigration from Asia, Africa, and Latin America, dramatically changing the country's demographic makeup. 100. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s devastated the Midwest, displacing hundreds of thousands of Americans. Extreme droughts and poor farming practices turned fertile lands into barren wastelands, forcing many families to migrate westward in search of better opportunities, particularly to California. 101. The attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, shocked the world and marked a major political crisis in modern American history. The storming of the Capitol by supporters of then-President Donald Trump led to widespread protests, violence, and the eventual impeachment of Trump for a second time. Was that a whirlwind tour of history? Or did we just scratch the surface? But let's be real, history is messy, and no list is ever perfect. So, what did we miss? Which event do you think deserves a spot on this list? Or, brace yourselves, which one shouldn't even be here? Let us know in the comments and don't hold back. History is a debate, after all.